Welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show. We're very happy to have a special guest this afternoon from the International Organization for Migration, Tanja Dedovic. Tanja, welcome virtually to the studios of the Association of African Universities TV, Agenda 2063 TV show. We'll be very happy to have you tell our audience very quickly who you are, rather than me wasting time telling them who you are. So please go ahead, and then we'll delve into the interview.
Right. Thank you very much for the invitation. So my name is Tanja Dedovic, and I'm a regional thematic specialist for labor mobility and social inclusion. And I work with IOM in the regional office in Cairo, and I'm based in Egypt. I have been here since February 2020.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanja. And thank you for agreeing to be part of this special partnership. So the theme today is really looking at migrants, something which we don't really always talk about migrants, which is the social protection for migrant workers in the informal economy. So I think probably the most important question that people want to know is, why do migrants that are moving most of the time, why would they need something like social protection? And how would you characterize that kind of social protection?
Well, I mean, I think just like every one of us, we strive to have social protection because of many things that can happen to any of us throughout our lifetime, from maternity leave to unemployment, to having maybe an injury or an accident while we are at the workplace, to sickness, to old age, disability, or just to also have health protection and to be able to see the doctors that we need, including the families, our families, if they need to go to the doctor. This is what we talk about when we speak about social protection. And I think for obvious reasons, migrant workers who even leave their countries of origin and therefore their social security network, they depend even more on social security as they move abroad to work abroad. So I think that is essentially why we are talking about social protection for migrants. And because you mentioned migrants in the informal sector, I think here the importance of this topic became more than evident during the COVID-19 crisis, when at least in the region where I'm working, but I believe that this is also very much the case in many countries throughout Africa, and as a matter of fact also in Latin America, that there is a very high prevalence of an informal sector. Some of the economies here in Africa, they have 85 to 90% of the active workforce working in the informal sector. Yes. Now, migrants in the informal sector, they are even more at disadvantage than national workers in the informal sector, because as we have seen during COVID-19, when some of the countries enforced very strict lockdowns, meaning that the workers in the informal sector, like the street vendors, they were basically out of a job from one day or 1 week to the other, and they had no opportunity to acquire their daily income. And in that case, many governments, they did make an effort to try to extend the national social security systems also to these workers in the informal sector. But obviously, the governments, first of all, tried to extend the social protection scheme to their national workers in the informal sector, not to the non-nationals. And those are the migrants. Those are the migrants who are in the informal sector because they are undocumented, because they move there in an irregular manner. So those are really the people that we are mostly concerned about when we as IOM speak about social protection for migrant workers in the informal sector. And that is because the whole COVID-19 is about trying to build back better, right? The whole
Yes.
COVID-19 response is about leaving no one behind. And with that, we as IOM really think no one. That means we also think of those people who are in an irregular status.
Tanya, what you're saying is quite worrying, because I think I saw some statistics about a week ago from the ECA, which was talking about there's a new poor that has been created out of COVID. I mean, COVID seems to be, we're on the tail end, apparently. And so a lot of the restrictions associated with COVID have come down. But what has come out of it is that there's this so-called new poor that has been created, as you say, because a lot of the benefits that ordinary workers were getting, even those who were staying at home because they couldn't go out because of lockdown, you realize that even some of them were not enjoying certain benefits because depending on how deep the pockets of the organizations were. But here's the case that these people who are migrants that are undocumented, who are kind of I wouldn't say the underbelly of society, but they're totally hidden. Who really gets to talk for them? We know that IOM has been doing this good work for over 70 years, but I mean, at a practical level, what steps are there in place for governments to say that we are going to articulate the plight of these hidden workers post-COVID? Who gets to do that? Because I think everybody, because borders are opening up slowly, everyone has kind of forgotten that there was, that there's still a lot of problems that came with COVID that we really need to roll back. So sure, you talk about building back better, but really, what are our governments generally? What kind of agreements have they signed up to commit themselves to making sure that migrants are also taken care of?
So let me start first of all by sharing with you a little bit of the work that we as the UN have been doing with governments in my region, which is the MENA region, yeah? And then yes. I'll try to go a bit broader and also try to shed some light on the African continental frameworks that do address social protection. So in the MENA region, and you might know that the whole continent has sort of been subdivided into sub-regions by the UN family. So North Africa and also the Arab states, there we have formed so-called issue-based coalitions, actually 8 of them. And one of them was the issue-based coalition on social protection. Now, in these issue-based coalitions, this is a consortium of all the UN agencies that do work on social protection. And the obvious organizations that are working on social protection is, of course, first of all, ILO, the International Labour Organization, because it is in their mandate, really, to talk about protection of workers, and then also of migrant workers. And then there is also the FAO, the Food Agriculture Organization, who are especially concerned about the social protection for workers in the agricultural sector, which, as you might know, is also highly informal. 80% of the workforce in the agricultural sector is informal. Then you have organizations like UNICEF that are very much concerned about the social protection for children. And you have WFP, the World Food Programme, and you have UNESCO, which is the regional economic organization for MENA. So you have a consortium of UN agencies, and the idea of these issue-based coalitions is to pool all the expertise and the resources of these different organizations and make that combined knowledge available to the governments. Now, what we did in last year, in November, is that we, as an issue-based coalition, we organized a first Arab Ministerial Forum on Social Protection. And we basically discussed issues of financing social protection, especially the extension of social protection systems. We discussed coverage. How can the social protection systems cover more people? We discussed governance of social protection systems, and we discussed how these social protection systems could be made more shock responsive, right? And we came out from this Arab Ministerial Forum with a declaration that was adopted by all the governments present in this Arab Ministerial Forum. So that's everyone from Morocco down to Sudan and up to Iraq and all the Gulf countries. And in this declaration, the governments, they made concrete commitments, in terms of recommendations, how social protection systems could be extended and financed and better governed and made more shock responsive. So governments have basically sat down with us over a period of 3 days, and we discussed, in breakout groups. We heard from governments how they have already tried to address the situation of workers, especially in the informal sector. And there is obviously still a lot of work to be done to also include irregular migrant workers in the informal sector, but already there is a recognition that you cannot leave these people out, because we are actually talking millions. This is not a couple of thousands of undocumented migrant workers. This is millions of migrant workers that are in the informal sector. So there was this Arab Ministerial Forum, there is this declaration, and I think I would also like to highlight the work that has been done by IOM, by ILO, by the African Union Commission under the so-called Joint Labor Migration Program, which is a continental program covering all of Africa. And one of the models that has been developed under this Joint Labor Migration Program is a migrant welfare fund model. And that is basically showing countries of origin a way or possibilities how they can ensure or make social protection more accessible for their nationals as they move abroad to work, for example, in the Gulf or further away. So we are looking at the ways how governments can engage as countries of origin, sending countries, but also as destination countries, what they can do on both sides to improve access to social protection. So as IOM and ILO, we have been working on this model for a migrant welfare fund under the GLMP program, but we are also doing an assessment on social protection and access to social protection for migrant workers in the Gulf. So we work really on both ends with the governments to try to address this really critical issue. Okay, so this is what I can tell you about the work that we are trying to do here in the MENA region. Now, if I look at the frameworks of African frameworks, I can see that, for example, the Ouagadougou +10 declaration and plan of action on employment, poverty eradication, and inclusive development in Africa also stresses the importance of social protection for the informal economy and rural workers, and the productivity improvement, in particular in SMEs and the public sector, why it's important to try to formalize the informal economy, get people out from the informal economy to formal jobs, because with that they would obviously have access to social protection, and the need of cooperation, obviously, also between the member states. So this, looking at the high amount of internal, or let's say intra-African labor mobility, this is a big issue for cooperating of African governments, not just African governments with the Gulf governments, for example. I would highlight maybe specifically the priority area 3 of this Ouagadougou declaration, which is precisely on social protection and productivity for sustainable inclusive growth. And there you can, for example, read that one of the outcomes that the government should be working towards is extended social protection floors coverage to excluded categories of workers and members of their families, including domestic workers. So you have it all there. There
Okay.
are enough declarations that show the way for governments how they can work towards social protection and more extended, more inclusive systems of social protection.
Thank you very much for that response, Tanya. I'm happy to learn that there's a lot more out there by way of protection, including the welfare fund, which is very encouraging to hear. However, given the type of show that this is, where we're talking about Agenda 2063, as you will know with Agenda 2063, and of course, it would also cover North Africa, why has there really been no specific mention of migrants, given the role that they play in the development of any member states? Why hasn't there really been any explicit mention of them in Agenda 2063? There are 7 aspirations, there are 14 flagship programs, and then a whole number of different articles associated with Agenda 2063. But you don't see any dedicated ones that talk about protecting migrants. It's very encouraging to hear that this month, the AU summit in Malabo, they're looking at the humanitarian agency that the AU wants to launch, and the role of migrants would definitely factor into that. But what would you attribute to why there's been this huge deficit in linking migrants with Agenda 2063?
Well, I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with you that it's not included there at all, or that it's completely missing. I would maybe differentiate between the Agenda 2063, which I would say is really a broad framework for African member states to deliver on Africa's goal for an inclusive, sustainable development, right? So that's really at a very high level. But it does manifest the drive, I would say, for unity, for self-determination, freedom, progress, collective prosperity. Okay, so it's all implicit, I would say. Actually, the first aspiration of this Agenda 2063 prioritizes a high standard of living, quality of life, and well-being for all citizens, including through social security and protection, right? So also including persons with disabilities. So this is how the Agenda 2063 is formulated. But this Agenda 63 becomes more concrete, I think, in documents like the Ouagadougou +10 Declaration, from which I was just quoting before. So I think the Agenda 2063 is a broad framework. I would not have expected that such a framework would mention, concrete, specific target groups. For that, you have other documents and plans of actions on employment, on inclusive development, like the Ouagadougou Declaration, which speak very specifically about social protection for the informal economy, for rural workers. They speak about migrant workers. So I think there is a difference. The Agenda 2063 is at a different level.
So obviously, it would not be able to capture it at that broad level. It would be so. So what you're saying is that it doesn't necessarily have to be explicit for it to be relevant. It can be more explicit in other documents. Yes.
At that level, yes. But for example, the declaration that we also came out with from this Arab Ministerial Forum, that speaks explicitly about migrant workers in the informal sector. So there you need to make sure that it's explicitly mentioned, because otherwise it's all too easy to again only focus on those regular migrant workers. No?
Okay.
But
Sure.
if you really want to be sure that you capture the migrant workers in the informal sector, then I think it's clear that we are not talking about regular migrant workers, because otherwise, why would they be in the informal sector?
True. Okay. So as we begin to wind down, because I know you also don't have too much time, not a lot of people know that there are three new institutions of the African Union, one in Morocco, one in Sudan, and one in Mali. Can you kindly unpack that for us very briefly, and how that could help in supporting the conversation on migrants?
So actually these AU centers, as you mentioned, in Mali, in Morocco, and in Khartoum, they will, among other things, do research, empirical applied research on all aspects of migration and mobility, including social protection aspects. And they will also facilitate or they will assist, let's say, in the formulation of migration policies, and also assist with the implementation of these policies of member states and the regional economic commissions. They will, among other things, provide technical assistance, therefore, when it comes to policy formulation. They will also provide capacity building for governments working on migration and mobility. And they will promote policies that foster the development impact of migration, and try to, on the other hand, address negative impacts of migration on the continent. So in that sense, they actually do very similar work than what IOM is also doing. And in fact, in my region, since I'm covering Morocco and Sudan, we are working very closely with the National Observatory on Migration in Morocco, and we are also working with the African Observatory, which is based in Morocco, and we are working with the Institute in Sudan. So we actually know quite well what they are doing, and we are working closely together with them, because we do very much the same thing. Being obviously the UN Agency on Migration, we also work with actually the government in Morocco right now on the formulation of a national employment strategy. And of course, we make sure that as we formulate this employment strategy with the government of Morocco, that we will include aspects of social protection of Moroccans being placed abroad. Likewise, in Sudan, we are currently working with the government on the formulation of a monitoring and licensing framework for recruitment agencies. We are working with them on a labor migration policy. We are working with them on pre-departure orientation. So all of this is, to support the governments in the formulation of these policies, and then in the implementation of these strategies. We are building capacities of the governments. So I am, it will be a very close cooperation between these AU centers and IOM and ILO, just like we are working really closely with AUC and ILO at the continental level under this joint labor migration program. But essentially, these are the tasks of these centers in Mali, Morocco, and Sudan.
Great. So a lot of exciting things happening along the way. But and finally, as we really wind down, in the post-COVID world, why should people be interested in a conversation on migration, apart from the fact that migrants are key in the delivery and facilitation of remittances to a lot of families?
Okay, let me take that a little bit broader. I'm aware that when we talk about migration, most people, the next thing they think about is remittances. Migration is so much more than about remittances. And as IOM, we really promote, and I say that so often that sometimes I feel that everyone has heard this until they cannot hear it no more. But as IOM, we promote safe, orderly, and regular migration. It's all enshrined in the Global Compact on Migration. And anyone who wants to know more, just read it. Why? Because if people can or migrate in a safe, orderly, and regular manner, that means that they are not migrating irregularly. They are migrating because they have a job offer, they have a contract, they have a job waiting for them. They move, they take up a decent job according to their qualifications and skills. They earn a decent salary. They are integrated where they are working. This is all the ideal case scenario, okay? When we talk about safe, orderly, regular migration, they take up a decent job, they are integrated, they can further develop professionally, personally, they build up a social network where they are working. Yeah? These capitals that they build, and this is not just about going somewhere to work to send money back home as remittances. I'm talking here about building up human capital, financial capital, social capital, cultural capital. These migrants who migrate in such a manner, they are the ones who can then act as development actors for countries of origin. And as I have just mentioned, they will obviously be able to contribute to development in the country of origin in many more ways, not just with money that they are sending back. They will bring back new ideas, new values. They will bring back their contacts and their networks that they have built. They will bring back their skills. Yeah? And I'm not even talking about permanent return. Most people don't return permanently anymore. People live transnational lives, right? So they stay where they are, they work where they are, but there are ways how their engagement in the country of origin can be facilitated. So for us as IOM, migration and mobility is the future. And it's, you know, it is a necessity. I mean, look also at the demographic developments globally. But it is necessary that it is well planned, that it is well managed, so that really all sides can benefit from this process, and not just the countries of destination, and not just the migrants, everyone. So this is a bit the vision that we have on migration.
Thank you so very much for that, Tanya Dejovic, Senior Officer at IOM in Cairo. Thank you for this very important conversation. I'd like to think we can have a part 2 someday. Let's see how it goes. But thank you. I think one important note that we need to end on is that migration and mobility is the future. People are leading transnational lives, and a lot of people are staying permanently in their places and supporting families across borders. That's the reality. And especially in a world in which there is post-COVID and there's also this new after, I think this is how we're going to see more of our lives. So thank you for helping educate people today. And we hope to continue the education in further programming. So thanks for your time and have yourself a great day. And to all those who joined us, we are very grateful. So have yourselves a great day. And from Emmanuel K. Bensa in Accra for Agenda 2063 TV show. Thank you for the production crew. We hope all questions can be addressed by email. We'll pick it up as and when practicable. All right then. So my name is E.K. Bensa Jr. Have yourselves a great day.